You hire Olivia and you hire Mark. Similar resumes, similar interviews, similar work experience. On paper, they look virtually the same, and even throughout the interview process, they look pretty much the same. But 6 months later, Olivia is closing enterprise deals and Mark is struggling to hit quota. So what's the difference between those two? Coachability.
We see people who are advanced in their careers that have done a lot, and their coachability is really low. It's also situational. It can be dynamic, where the coachability ebbs and flows.
One of the mistakes that managers make is they'll pour effort and time into the wrong people because they haven't appropriately assessed the coachability of the people on the other side that they're in charge of developing. Willingness we define as sustained readiness to receive feedback and immediately convert it into deliberate action.
Sometimes we're more willing, sometimes we're less willing. To have that be a sustainable pattern, sustained readiness, that means that willingness is a part of who you are. That contributes to accelerated development.
Self-awareness, what is it? An accurate, evidence-based view of one's impact and performance.
You need sources outside of yourself to help you understand where you are.
You're listening to The Leader Factor, a podcast where we take leadership principles and distill them into actionable behaviors, shareable frameworks, and scalable initiatives. Here are your hosts, Tim and Junior.
Hey everybody, it's Junior. Hope you enjoyed today's episode. Everything we covered today is going to be put together in a nice downloadable available for you in the show notes and at leaderfactor.com. Make sure to go and download it. If you liked today's episode, don't hesitate to leave us a like. Please subscribe and share with a friend. Catch you next time. You hire Olivia and you hire Mark. Similar resumes, similar interviews, similar work experience. On paper, they look virtually the same, and even throughout the interview process, they look pretty much the same. But 6 months later, Olivia is closing enterprise deals and Mark is struggling to hit quota and he's blaming the CRM. 6 months after that, Olivia has been promoted and Mark is gone. Out of here. So what's the difference between those two? Coachability. And for many leaders, it's difficult to spot. So that's our topic today, coachability. How to spot it, how to develop it in your people, and what to do if it's not exactly where you want it to be. Tim, how are you doing today?
Doing great. I want to chime in on this. This is such an interesting topic, Junior, because it may at first blush seem pretty straightforward that coachability is just positively correlated with performance. And I think that it probably is to some extent when people are maybe early in their careers, but it's not that straightforward after that. We see people who are advanced in their careers that have done a lot, and they become, and their coachability is really low. It's also situational. It can be dynamic, where the coachability ebbs and flows. Don't you think?
I do. And one of the mistakes that managers make is they'll pour effort and time, energy into the wrong people because they haven't appropriately assessed the coachability of the people on the other side that they're in charge of developing. And so maybe they're spending too much time on someone that they shouldn't be, and the inverse might also be true. So in the Olivia and Mark example, surely there can be problems aside from coachability that can affect an outcome like that. But this is a big one. It
is a big one. And what I gotta say, one of the things that strikes me is that some of the least, and I don't know why this happens, but some of the least coachable people that I've worked with they have been some of the most successful at some points in their career, but then their coachability kind of comes to a halt. So that's an interesting thing to think about as we move into this conversation.
Yeah. I like to think about NBA All-Stars who have been in the league for 10, 15 years, and they still have coaches. They're in the locker room at halftime, and maybe the coach has 2 years in the league. That's always a super interesting dynamic.
It is.
You have those all-stars sitting there and saying, okay, coach, right, let's drop the play. Yeah. And they'll chime in, but pretty interesting to see that can stay stable across time, even with the highest performers. So let's get into what coachability actually is. Coachability is a function of two variables, willingness and self-awareness. So we've got willingness on the y-axis, self-awareness on the x-axis, and you'll see that we've created yet another 2x2 matrix.
Yes.
So that's what we're going to be using today to frame the conversation. We're going to go through each of these boxes, which is a combination of those two variables. We'll talk about the symptoms, how to identify when someone is in one of those boxes, and then what to do about it. Because ideally, we want them to have high willingness and high self-awareness, but they may not at first. We want to help them get there. So let's define each of those. Self-awareness, what is it? An accurate, evidence-based view of one's impact and performance. Tell me a little bit about self-awareness as a variable in people you lead.
Well, it's crucial. Without self-awareness, if you don't know where you are, Junior, if you don't comprehend your current position, you really can't make progress. You're kind of at sea and you don't know where to go. And so you need, and I love the definition, it's evidence-based. You need sources outside of yourself to help you understand where you are. And that remains true, I think, throughout life. And so we'll talk about how to get there a little bit more, but an accurate, evidence-based view of one's impact and performance. So first of all, there's a metacognition requirement. You need to think about how you think. You need to pay attention to how others react to you, the streams of data that are coming back to you as you interact with others. So there's such a huge component of, I guess you might call it intentionality. You're very deliberate about paying attention to the way that people react and respond to you. You're thinking about that. You're processing that. And that takes practice. But even with all of that, you're still going to need outside sources to help you, to give you unvarnished, unedited feedback about yourself.
I think it's worth pointing out that the self-awareness isn't just social. It's not that they're only paying attention to the social impact of the things they're doing. There's a technical angle as well. If we look just at outcomes, they're going to have a really accurate sense of what the root cause was, and it's going to match the observable facts. And it's a great way to be able to deduce someone's self-awareness is if they can explain root cause and it matches the observable facts, both in a social and in a technical sense, you can say, wow, this person has high self-awareness. If the opposite is true, and when they try to explain root cause, it's not matching what actually happened in the situation socially or practically, then we have a problem. And that's one of the ways to unpack early on if someone has high self-awareness or not.
Another thing, Junior, is you got to learn how to pay attention to your own longitudinal data, your own time series data about your life. So, for example, what do you know about your own resilience? And how do you know about that? That's not short-term data. So you're looking at evidence over time to see what your pattern is as you travel through adversity. That's just another example where it's not short-term, it's not situational, it's long-term. That's also part of self-awareness.
And it leads into great interview questions if you can ask people about their patterns.
That's right.
Let's go to the next one. How would we define willingness? Willingness we define as sustained readiness to receive feedback and immediately convert it into deliberate action. Willingness is an important thing in management. It's an important thing in those you manage. Sustained readiness.
I love that, by the way. Sustained readiness. That combination, that word combination really struck me.
Why? Say more.
Because I think we go in and out of willingness, a lot of us. Sometimes we're more willing, sometimes we're less willing. And to have that be a sustainable pattern, sustained readiness, that means that willingness is a part of who you are. It's a part of your makeup. It's a part of your character. That's really what we're looking for. And that contributes to, as we will see, accelerated development. And so that's a question. That's a question that we can all ask ourselves. What is the nature of your willingness? Not only is it high or low, but does it ebb and flow? Are you sometimes highly willing, sometimes not very willing? sometimes very resistant, stubborn, entrenched, intractable in the way that you respond to things, in the way that you try to get better, improve, grow, develop. So I just love that sustained readiness to receive feedback. Ooh, I tell you, that stopped me dead in my tracks, because I have to confess that sometimes I don't exhibit sustained readiness to receive feedback. That's a probing question that we can ask ourselves.
Yeah, willingness. So how do you spot willingness in a person? I think willingness has a lot to do with offense. I think willing people are more apt to move. These are hand raisers. These are doers. These are note takers. These are askers.
These are volunteers.
These are volunteers. These are people who are moving. They're doing things. And one of the patterns that I've noticed in my own response to the people that I get to interact with professionally, I really like high willingness people.
Oh,
I really like them.
they're a joy to work with.
They really are. And we'll get into the combination of willingness and self-awareness. But man, if you key in on one, you see a pattern in somebody of high willingness, you know that there's potential. It's out the gate.
You know you're going to have an adventure together.
Yeah. So again, if you can dive into that, create some behavioral interviewing questions about willingness, do it. We're not going to go there today, but it's an important thing. Okay, now let's get into the combinations. The first combination we're going to talk about is low willingness, low awareness. So we're going to say they're about here on the willingness scale, maybe here on the awareness scale, and that's going to put them into this box. And we call this the failing box. Might seem harsh. Why do we call it the failing box?
Well, what else is it going to be? You're not self-aware, and you're very low in willingness. Where are you going? You're just not going anywhere. Most likely you're regressing. You're not willing to put forth the effort, and you're not willing to take an honest, penetrating, unsparing view of yourself and really dig in. And so where can you possibly go except backwards?
Yeah.
Really?
We're going to be using a car analogy as we go through these 4 boxes. And this one we're going to call flat tire, no GPS.
Okay.
So we're not going anywhere because the tire's flat.
Yeah.
And even if we were, we wouldn't know where we were going because we have no GPS. So imagine you have no map, you're out in the middle of nowhere, and you have a flat tire. You are dead stuck. And in that case, the willingness, you don't even care to get unstuck. You're just going to stay there, which is problematic. So what does this look like in reality? This is going to look like excuses. It's going to look like deflection. A person in this box is going to do very minimal to no preparation for anything. They're definitely not going to be taking notes. They're not going to be raising hands and volunteering. These people are going to be stagnant. And so if you see this in a person, what do? That leads us to the next slide. Confront and decide. This is what you do. So as a leader, you're going to be surveying the landscape. You're going to be looking at the person in front of you. You're going to gauge the self-awareness. You're going to gauge the willingness. And if someone falls in this box, this is going to be our prescription to you. You're going to have to confront and decide. So the first thing we do in this situation is we present the gap with data. So we have to help the person understand that there's a gap going on. The first thing we want to do is see if they can key in on that themselves.
Well, I was just going to say, if the willingness is really low and the self-awareness is really low, they're not typically going to be excited to confront the gap. And if you coach through questions, typically you're not going to get very far because they're not going to go there on their own. They don't want to see the gap. They don't want to address the gap. They don't even want to acknowledge the gap. And so it's not going to be a pleasant journey to get them to view the gap.
Well, here's an example. Let's say that you have a Mark on your team in a sales context, and Mark is 60% to goal on the month, and the team is already at 105%. You have that data in front of you and you say, hey, Mark, it looks like you're 60% to quota. The team's at 105. Help me understand what's going on. If you see the patterns of deflection that we talked about in a recent episode, you see blame, denial, or excuse, and that becomes habitual. That's a pattern. There's not a lot we can do because the willingness isn't there. Even if we impose the awareness by saying, hey, here's all of the data. Here's exactly what's going on. Here's what we see in the situation. Here's what your team members think about it. Here's what we've heard from customers. If there's blame, denial, and excuse and a complete aversion to reality, we have no other choice but to decide. And that's the second part. So if in that confrontation, you clarify the non-negotiables and you're still not seeing the willingness and you're still not seeing the self-awareness, we move into a 30-day performance improvement plan with micro targets. If that 30-day plan doesn't bear fruit, we manage you out. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, what else are you going to do? Now, in sales, Junior, in the example that you're given, performance is usually quite visible and measurable, and you've got the metrics that show you where you are. But in other positions, in organizations, it's often not like that at all. It's not as transparent. There's more ambiguity around performance, and you can kind of hide behind things, especially if you're not clearly responsible for certain outcomes, but you're more involved in processes, and you have intermediate handoffs in a long chain of tasks. So people hide. They often hide in the bowels, especially of large organizations. And sometimes they just kind of work out this cozy accommodation with professional life, and they go along, and they get very entrenched, and they kind of calcify into their roles, and they do get sterile, and they do get stagnant, and they get very resistant to change. I've seen this again and again.
I've seen it too. And I want to dig into a point that you made about the difficulty sometimes outside of an environment that's really quantitative to hone in on whether or not we're being successful. Pro tip for anyone who has direct reports, you have to establish what success looks like with your people. You have to do it. If it's not
from the beginning,
from the very, very beginning. So ask yourself that about your direct reports. Are you confident that every single one of your direct reports knows what success looks like for them? If you can't answer yes to that question, you need to immediately, one, figure that out for yourself if you don't know. And then two, figure out a way to help them understand. You need to have a conversation immediately. One of the things that I really like to do is anytime we have a new hire, we set those goals from the beginning, and we have a 30, often a 45, 60-day type check-in, depending on the nature of the role. We'll outline what success looks like. We'll see if we're making progress to whatever that vision is, and then we'll be able to have an intervention. If you don't do that and there are not clear expectations, good luck trying to hold people accountable. You're going to have a really hard time.
You created ambiguity from the beginning.
And I've done this more than once, and it's not fun. Because then you're put into a situation where you know that there's non-performance, but you have really nothing to lean on in terms of holding them accountable to some sort of standard.
Right.
So especially in those roles that are a little bit more subjective, you got to go impose that. Okay, let's move into the next one, progressing. Progressing is the next combination. We've got high willingness. We've got low self-awareness. So that box right here is the progressing box. Tim, tell us a little bit about the progressing box.
Right. So your willingness is high. That means you are willing to put forth the effort. Even though your self-awareness is low, if you're willing to put forth the effort, you will make some progress. It may come slowly. It may be a very gradual ascent, but you're still going to make progress. And that's the key. So you're just not going as fast as you could because your awareness is lagging. But you know what I find is that if someone fits this profile, Junior, and they are progressing, over time, even if it's slow, the self-awareness will increase because they continue to strive. They continue to put forth the effort. They're trying. And so it comes. It may come slowly, but it comes.
In the car analogy, we call this good gas pedal, foggy windshield. So you're good at laying on the gas, you can move the car, but you've got a foggy windshield. You're not entirely sure where you're going because the awareness isn't there. So what does this look like practically speaking? This is going to be someone with good energy. It's often what I find. They've got good energy. They're hand raisers. They're doers. They often overpromise. That's a pattern in this group. They often misdiagnose root cause. So they're raring to go. They're bright-eyed and bushy-tailed.
Yeah.
But
so they play offense, but they make mistakes.
Yeah. Well, if you
they
ask
have to go back and clean things up a lot.
You'll ask something about root cause, and they'll either misattribute something that might seem fairly obvious to you, or they'll excuse something that they're not quite up to speed with. They don't understand. And so this category is one that's pretty interesting. You have to make sure to get this right. If you misdiagnose the willingness piece or the awareness piece, your coaching response is going to be incorrect. So if we go down to the coaching response for progressing, what do? We're going to say that your play is mirror and model. You want to model the right behavior so that they have something to go off of. And that's one of the things that helps build awareness in people is a comparison. And it's often why, again, pro tip, I like to hire in twos. If you have someone who is high willingness, low self-awareness, and they don't have a model that's a peer that's doing well, it's really difficult. It's also difficult for you to know if they're doing well or not if you don't hire in twos. But that's one thing that you can do.
Because they don't have references.
They don't have references.
I think people that you would classify as overzealous, Junior, would often fit into this category. The energy's there, the willingness is there, the enthusiasm's there, but they go, they're not directing them, they're not correcting themselves along the way. They're not diagnosing along the way. They're not adjusting along the way. And as you said, they don't have, often it's for a lack of models or reference points or guidance along the way too.
A lot of people don't understand the idea that the eventual goal is to have them coach themselves. A lot of people have not understood that principle. They've never been exposed to a coaching scenario where they were the ones who were expected to come with some answers, which builds dependency, which builds learned helplessness. So they might be in a situation where they're just waiting for feedback and they haven't taken that step to say, well, maybe I might be able to look at my own performance and self-diagnose and self-correct. And so that's why we have the mirror piece of this prescription, which is use replays, use data dashboards, encourage nightly or weekly reflection logs. So let's say that you have someone in client success. It's a client-facing role. You've got recorded calls. Or let's say that you're just in a team meeting. That's probably more broadly applicable. You're going to want to immediately after look at film, right? Either literally or figuratively. And ask, how did that go? Because what do we want to do? We want to help build some introspection, some metacognition, to have them look back at performance and say, well, it actually didn't go as well as I had hoped. Okay, why do you think that? Well, because so-and-so responded this way. Why do you think they responded that way? Because I said this thing, or I said it this way, or I didn't do anything. If you can start to build that muscle and the person is high willingness, now you can see how it's possible to start building the awareness piece.
That's right. That's right. I love that.
Okay,
Go back and watch the film.
That's right. And that can be a scary thing for people, I might add. It can be a scary thing for me, right? I might have to go back and watch this podcast over and say, what did I do to mess it up? Okay, plateauing. This is the next combination. We've got low willingness, high self-awareness. This is an interesting one. So this box over here, we call the plateauing box. Have you ever had someone in the plateauing box?
Yes. Yes. So you think about the combination. The willingness is low. It may once have been high, but for some reason it's low now. But the awareness is high. So this is someone who is pretty savvy about where they are, how they perform, how they interact, the impact they have, their skills, their abilities, their performance, their competence. They're aware of all of this. They're keenly aware, but they just for whatever reason, Junior, they lost their motor. They've lost their motivation. And so they are on a plateau.
For this one, we'll say maps the route, won't drive. So they know where to go. They're highly aware of what has to happen in order to accomplish the objective, but they just won't.
What I found in this case, Junior, is that often it's situational. For example, if someone is highly aware of all of these things, that is evidence that they have some good skills and they once had willingness. Often it's evidence that they once had willingness. So what I often find is that when you find someone that's plateauing, there's a situation, there's something that's getting in the way. It could be a problem. It could be a life event. It could be some kind of adversity. It could be that they are very resistant to an initiative or a direction or a decision. Something's gotten in their way, and they have just lost their willingness and their motivation. And so if you can do some root cause analysis with them when you're coaching them to figure out why they are where they are, it's usually a temporary situation. And there's something that is keeping them there. We've got to go find what it is and dislodge it if we can.
I'm thinking about the word usually, and I'm trying to figure out if I agree or disagree, if it's usually temporary or if it's usually permanent. If we look into some of the behaviors, I wrote down a couple: accurate self-talk, low initiative, analysis paralysis, perfectionism. So if we're seeing some of those things and we're trying to get to root cause, I think leading with inquiry, as usual, is probably the best approach. When we get into the prescription for all of you, if you see this in your own people, we say motivate and contract. And I love this first one, link goals to a personal why. The personal why is usually what gives the high willingness, the drive, the movement forward, the offense. And often a pattern can be that when people have lost that willingness, they're no longer tuned into their personal why. And so if you take an executive as an example who's made it inside the organization, and they were once high willingness and high self-awareness, and they've lost the motor, it could be that they've lost their personal why. There's no longer connection to the goal. There's no longer connection to the brand, the vision. And so you might have to try to reconnect that, splice the wires, and help them regain momentum.
Oh, I think that's a really good point. Let me give you two examples, Junior. Here's the first one. The first one is situational, where I worked with a gentleman and he lost his why and therefore his willingness because someone was promoted to be his new boss, and he didn't like that person, and he didn't respect that person, and he didn't think that person was competent and should have been promoted. And that was extremely deflating to him. And so for a time, he was plateaued, and he was not willing to even work. But we were able to work through that over time. And he was able to, I guess, reconcile his feelings and his opinions and his attitudes and learn how to work with this gentleman. Case two, though, is a little bit different. The second example that I can think of is another person that I worked with who plateaued. And for them, it was really a matter of they were late in their career. They were no longer willing to do the work to stay current. They let their skills become obsolete, and they were kind of coasting and in semi-retirement, still on the job, eventually coasting into retirement, but just saying, this is the final chapter of my professional life. And almost with an entitlement mentality that I've worked hard throughout my life and I'm competent and I've contributed a lot, and therefore I get to take my foot off the pedal and kind of coast into retirement. And this person, we could not turn around. Interesting, very different situation, but another example of plateauing.
Well, and it's difficult to help them understand in those situations that the market owes them nothing.
Right.
The market doesn't care. And so you may say, well, yeah, they have contributed and great. That's well and good. And we appreciate the seniority and we appreciate tenure and we appreciate contribution. But the second that stops, why should the organization care if the market doesn't care?
Well, and this is where the distortion comes in, Junior, because an entitlement mentality takes over and the person thinks this institution that I'm working for should take care of me now.
They owe it to me.
Yeah, they owe it to me.
Right.
Very dangerous.
Well, and that's why I bring up the market perspective, because
Sure.
that becomes arguable. If you look in isolation at the institution and you're like, wow,
so should the institution buffer the market?
Right.
And say the market doesn't care.
That's the question.
But we need to?
That's the question.
Yeah.
Right. It's an interesting question.
It is an interesting
And I'd be
question.
interested to see what people think if this is a controversial point of view. But I think that the organization, they can buffer a little bit, for the most part, should reflect what the market says.
Yeah.
The market's not going to be wrong.
Yeah.
And the market's going to tell you that if you're not creating value, that you're not welcome here anymore. So either you continue to create value, or it's going to be drain on the organization as a whole, everyone in it, its performance in the market. Those effects are far-reaching and long-lasting.
I'll give you
gotta
one.
Be careful.
Yeah. I'll give you one other example from academia. This one has been repeated over and over again. I had a professor years ago who had gained tenure and had been very productive in research and publishing his research and contributing to his field. And then he gained tenure. It wasn't long after he gained tenure that he went into a mode of basically retirement. He wasn't contributing. He wasn't creating and contributing original research. He wasn't publishing. He would often not even show up to class, but he was secure in his tenure track position. And that's the way that he contributed after that. And he was totally buffered from market forces, Junior. Do I think that's right? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. A complete disservice to the students. And he was he was taking advantage of the institution and the concept of tenure. The concept of tenure does not exist to coddle him from the time that he gained tenure, but that's what he was doing.
I'll qualify this by just saying that we'll allow for people have bad days. People have bad weeks. They get into funks, and sometimes we need to help them get out of that. We're allowing space for that. But if that becomes the dominant pattern,
for 20 years,
certainly, then at that point we've got a problem. Okay, let's go into the last one. Accelerating. This is high willingness, high awareness. So this accelerating box is the fun box. But here's the interesting point. I think a lot of leaders who have people who fall into the accelerating box make the wrong decision with these people. They often feel like once someone's in this box, they don't have to do anything because the person's high willingness, they're high awareness, so they should be good to go, right? But that's not the case. So how do you know if someone's in this box? They seek stretch, they teach others, they self-initiate postmortems, after-action reviews. And so what are we here to do? Here's our prescription: challenge and champion. I really
love the way that you frame that.
It's important. Both of these things are really important. Challenge, I could talk about this one for a long time. People who are high performers, who are in this category, who are high willingness, high self-awareness, need challenge. And the misstep of many managers who have these people is to not give the person enough challenge. That will often happen. The opposite can also be true, where they overload because the person will just continue to perform.
Sure.
And so you have to be careful in finding the appropriate balance.
Yeah, we don't want to exploit.
No, but there has to be healthy challenge. And then champion is also important. You want everyone in the organization to be able to see that person, see that they're recognized, and want to model that person's behavior.
Good point.
So if you can point at them in public and say, hey, this person is in this box, not that you would say it that way, but when you see instances of high awareness and high willingness, you want to call those out publicly and to the person in private. You really want to shed light on what they're doing well so that they continue to feel motivated to do that.
So you don't want to exploit them, but you also don't want to exercise benign neglect, which is what we often do because we just say, let them go. I'm going to spend my time with those who are struggling, but we do that too much. I love the point here, Junior, to rotate them as peer coaches. They're very versatile. They can help about anybody. So you send them on assignment.
Yep.
And you keep that going.
Here's, I think, one of the patterns of neglect that managers show their high performers. There's a stat I found that I threw in the notes. U.S. managers spend nearly 1 full workday per week managing poor performers. That's a lot.
That's a lot.
So it's an instance of squeaky wheel gets the grease, where if you're a manager and you have people in the other 3 boxes, you're often going to ignore the people in the upper right quadrant because they're likely to be able to take care of themselves, and you got to go and fix all of the other trouble.
That's exactly right.
But you got to be careful in doing that. So for those of you who are out there managing someone who is in that box, the accelerating box, you got to make sure to pay attention. And it's ironic because they get maybe 5-10% of your total attention relative to the 80-90% that you're giving your poor performers, yet they're the ones who provide the exponential returns for you.
They are the A players.
They're the A players. They're the ones that are probably 10x performers.
That's right.
So you got to be careful. Okay, let's go back, or not back, but forward to what this next slide we call the learning loop. Action, data, reflection, and adjustment. This is what we want to help our people do. This is what we do as effective coaches. So we're going to present data. Hopefully there will be reflection on the part of the coachee. We're going to help facilitate that. Hopefully we see a behavioral adjustment, and then we'll see new action and results. We want to keep this loop going in an effort to move people out of the box that they're in, if they're in one of the 3 that we don't want to be in. I'm going to go back to the coachability framework up here. So if you have somebody who's in the progressing box, the failing box, the plateauing box, you know which axis you need to work on. If you're in failing, both. Progressing, we need to work on awareness. Plateauing, we need to work on willingness. If we're up here in the accelerating box, we got to keep it going. So I like this model because it gives us some prescription as leaders. What do we do when we see people in these buckets? My last invitation for every manager would be to present your people with this model and have them plot themselves. It will help you see if the awareness is there and where you're at relative to where they are in the coaching scenario. It's a really useful exercise, and then you can set goals accordingly.
I would agree with that, Junior. Don't keep it a secret. And if as you take your people through the model, that exercise itself is an exercise in self-awareness. So explain the 2x2 matrix, explain the axes, explain the quadrants and the labels, and then say, so where do you think you would plot yourself? And then help me understand. And then listen. That gives you, I can't think of a better way to assess the self-awareness of one of your direct reports.
Yeah, I agree. Everybody, that's been the conversation for today. Coachability, willingness, and self-awareness. If you like today's episode, leave us a like, subscribe, and share with a friend. And I would like to know what your favorite part of today's episode was. So if you're watching somewhere where there's comments, let us know. And if you have any future episode ideas, we'd love to hear those too. We will see you in the next episode. Take care.